everyone, and happy All Hallows Eve. Make sure to pay attention to the screen, as I would like to thank those that sent in their requests. With all of that being said, it is time to go back to ashes and the grave. For once we arise from the dead, we are a putrid, cryptid version of ourselves, ready to terrorize anyone around us. Now, it's time to sit back and relax, kick back, grab a snack, or tuck in and get warm, and prepare for this grisly dose of vocal melatonin entitled Subscriber Requested Halloween Horror Stories. Right after this intro, there will be an ad. I'll read the first story. There will be an ad, and after that, there will be no more ads within this video. Oh, shit. I almost forgot. If you are new here or haven't done so already, please don't forget to subscribe, like, share, and comment. Now, on with the thrills. One time, my cousin and I were playing hide and seek, casually at my mom's friend's house on Friday in the afternoon. We always played upstairs at her house when her son wasn't home. Then, my cousin came out of his hiding spot, looking kinda off. He said he heard a scratching noise and mimicked it on the print of his shirt. I don't know, but for whatever reason, something told me to go downstairs. I told my cousin to go downstairs, and he said hell no, and that everything was fine. But the look on his face told me otherwise. So I finally got him to go downstairs. We sat down, and that's when shit went down. We heard footsteps upstairs. It sounded like they were going to and down, but whenever I looked up, there was no one there. My cousin and I sat downstairs quietly and even heard angry breathing next to our ears, like someone was right next to us. But again, no one was there. It all stopped until my mom and her friends came out of the room that was downstairs. And then suddenly, all of it stopped like nothing ever happened. I'm not crazy, and I know I wasn't the only one that heard this happening. I asked my cousin if he heard the breathing, and he said yes, and even said it sounded angry and mimicked the way it sounds. To this day, I still remember it like yesterday. I never knew a fear like that could exist intensely as it did that day. I deeply regret visiting my grandparents. Growing up, I wasn't around my grandparents a lot. They lived 6 hours away in a very small town in Missouri, and after my mother moved to Arkansas, I barely seen them at all. I had talked to them on the phone several times, mostly on holidays and birthdays. When I got a bit older, I began to rebel a little bit. My parents weren't happy about this. They sat me down one day and said to me, "You're going to spend the summer with your grandparents. Your grandpa ought to straighten you out." 2 days after school ended, they drove me the 6-hour drive to my grandparents. They took my phone and computer and left. They lived in a small beat-up house surrounded by a big wooded area. I stepped into the kitchen and called out for my grandparents, only to get no reply. I found a handwritten note stuck to the fridge. What I read sent chills down my spine. "Hello, dear. Your grandpa and I have gone on a hunting trip and will be back tomorrow evening. I know our house is old and may seem scary, but I assure you all is well, as long as you follow these simple rules. Number 1. The dogs must only be let out between the hours of 9 a.m. and 4 p.m. If you hear scratching at the door between the hours of 12:45 a.m. to 4:30 a.m., call your buddy into your bedroom. He will protect you. Number 2. If you see a man with purple hair and a flashlight outside, don't be alarmed. That's just Cheyenne. However, if he doesn't have a flashlight, knock on the window 3 times, then close your curtains. Number 3. If a small boy shows up at the door and asks for water, you must say, "Go talk to Shelby." The boy's name is Matthew. He may seem like a harmless child, but under no circumstances can he be let into the house. He will persist that you let him in, but do not let him fool you. Number 4. If Cheyenne comes to visit, let him in. He can be trusted. However, if he touches any of the cats, put them outside as fast as you can and make sure the doors are locked. Go to your room, lock your door, and pray. After exactly 3 hours, knock on your door. If there's no response, it's safe to come out. Number 5. The bathroom sink leaks. If at any point throughout the night it stops leaking, you cannot leave your room until exactly 6:56 a.m. Number 6. If a man knocks on the door and claims to be Edward, lock every door and window and pray for exactly 3 hours. Number 7. Only leave one light on at a time. If you fail to do this, go to the attic and pray. Number 8. If the dogs begin to bark at 2:47 a.m., knock on your door 7 times and say goodnight. Afterwards, pray for exactly 3 hours, then go to bed. Number 9. If you hear what sounds like an animal yelping from the attic, do not go in there. They are trying their best to lure you in. Number 10. Under no circumstances should you enter the kitchen or the guest bedroom after sunset. Number 11. At 1:29 a.m., retrieve the radio from my bedroom. Turn it on and let static play until sunrise, then return it to my bedroom. If you fail to follow these rules or have any questions at all, just ask Cheyenne. We love you and we'll see you tomorrow. This is not an abduction, but an unexplained sighting. I've been an amateur astronomer since a preteen. I'm an old fart now. Have spent hundreds of hours under the night sky and have been taking astrophotos for several years now. In all that time, I'd seen lots of cool and interesting things in the sky, but never anything I couldn't explain. About 3 years ago, I was setting up for a night of imaging and called my wife out to the backyard to look at a few things before starting the imaging run. I was slewing the scope over to the Great Globulars cluster in Hercules when I caught a strange red and orange light, almost a point source, out of the corner of my eye moving towards us from the northwest to the southeast. I think I said out loud, "What in the hell is that?" as I couldn't see any anti-collision lights. It was very bright and in the wrong place and moving in the wrong direction for the approach to the regional airport around 8 miles away. As they got closer, I saw another one further away and through the trees, which was soon joined by another. Both my wife and I just stared, stunned and slightly on edge. As for the next 20 minutes, these lights tracked nearly overhead, more than 24 of them, some in pairs, some in trios in triangle formation, completely silent as they flew past and disappeared off into the southeast. At some point, I remember my phone and took some video. But of course, it's the typical shaky and blurry shit you always see when people claim to having captured a UFO. Both wife and I have terminal degrees and are research scientists, and all our training makes us skeptical of unsubstantiated claims, demanding evidence before accepting. But neither of us had come up with a satisfying explanation for what we both saw. We thought maybe Chinese lanterns, but I checked the weather conditions, including flight weather, and the winds aloft were from the south. So if what we saw were lanterns, then they moved against the prevailing winds. It was the summer of 1992, and I was 20 years old, and I had just completed my junior year of college, and I was staying in the same city as the campus to take some summer classes. I also worked a couple of part-time jobs to handle living expenses. One of my jobs was at a food delivery place. We cooked and delivered steaks, chicken, and burgers instead of the usual pizza or Asian food. One night, after completing my shift, I was bored, and for laughs, decided to check out an adult movie and novelty store that I had seen sometimes in the course of my driving for that job. I parked amongst several other cars and got out of the car to go into the store. I saw a middle-aged man with a patsy appearance, with greasy dark hair and a receding hairline in the car parked closest to the store. I approached the car on my way in. No way around it, really. And he raised his hand, "Hello," to me. Not wanting to be rude, I raised my hand in return. As I walked directly by the driver's side door, he said, "Hey." Hello," I said in return. He leaned his head out of the window. He said, "You want to go get it off?" Taken aback, I replied, "No," and hurried into the store. I browsed about and put off the sheer seediness of the place, quickly left. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw the guy in his car in a different parking space. I got into my car and started out of the parking lot. As I got to the road, I saw the guy start his car and continue to come out as well. Hoping this was coincidence, I turned out of the parking lot to go home. It wasn't coincidence. Suddenly, this guy was following me very closely and blinking his high beams at me every few blocks. I tried to lose him at some traffic signals, but that was unsuccessful. I decided to go an alternate route at that point, not wanting to direct this creep to where I was living. Luckily, my delivery job had made me familiar with a lot of the roads in the city. I headed for a particularly labyrinthine neighborhood, turned in and took as complicated a route as I could, as quickly as I could, and finally lost him in there. I thought that was the end of it. A few weeks later, during work at the takeout place, I stopped at a convenience store in the course of a delivery to get a soda. After I checked out, I saw the same guy. He smiled and raised his hand hello again. I hurried outside to my car, but this time I was in my shirt and hat from the takeout place. Now he knew where I worked. By the time I left the convenience store, he was following me again. Fortunately, I was able to lose him again, but spent the rest of the summer afraid to see him pop up at my place of work, or worse, order food and bring me to his house. Thankfully, that did not happen. But, skeevy guy who likes to follow people, I hope I don't ever meet you again. And now, dear readers, it was requested to tell elevator stories. Since these are so small, I'm going to go ahead and read a cluster of them together. Here we go. Elevator worker fatally electrocuted in Manhattan. An elevator mechanic was killed on March 28th at around 9:30 p.m. in Midtown Manhattan after being electrocuted. The man, Ed Bradley of Staten Island, was reportedly performing maintenance in the engine room of AXA Equitable building at 1290 6th Avenue when he was electrocuted. A fire official said they found Bradley unconscious and in cardiac arrest, and a police source said Bradley died less than 30 minutes later. New York's utility company Con Edison had been called to the building for safety reasons, an agency spokesman said, but it was unclear how Bradley came in contact with the live wires. Bradley, a father of 3, worked for the Schindler Group, a company that develops and installs elevators, for the past 5 years. New York woman burned alive in elevator. New York police arrested a man on December 28th in the horrific burning death of a woman in Brooklyn elevator. The woman was burned alive in the elevator of her apartment building when a man, dressed as an exterminator, doused her with flammable liquid and then set her on fire with a Molotov cocktail in Prospect Heights. All of it was caught in disturbingly clear surveillance footage. The victim, Dolores Gillespie, who was 64, was returning from grocery shopping. Jerome Isaacs, 47, had been charged with first-degree murder in Gillespie's death after he turned himself in to the police. He reportedly had been hired by Gillespie to do odd jobs around her apartment, but had been fired recently when Gillespie caught him stealing. A New York woman died on December 14th after being stuck between elevator doors when the car began moving, crushing her between 2 floors. A California woman suffered a similar fate in November at Cal State Long Beach. The New York woman was identified as 41-year-old Suzanne Hart, an advertising executive at Young and Rubicam. Quick update. New Yorkers took to the stairs on December 15th and 16th following a stunning elevator accident that killed an advertising executive in Midtown Manhattan. Many residents and workers in the nation's biggest city bypassed riding the elevator, while some reportedly braved 10 flights of stairs as fear pulsating through a city of busy skyscrapers whose tenants depend on the vertical vehicles. Transil Elevator, a service company, had worked on the elevator just hours before Hart's death, spurring investigators to look into what could have caused the car to move with open doors. Nicholas White took what would be the longest smoke break ever on a Friday night in October 1999. White survived 41 hours stuck in a Manhattan skyscraper's elevator. The ordeal was caught on the building's surveillance camera. Afterward, White never returned to work for the magazine Business Week, suing the building's management company for $25 million, though he reportedly received just a fraction of that sum. And what is understood to be the worst elevator disaster of all time? An estimated 200 people died in the elevators of the World Trade Center buildings on September 11, 2001. Elevators plummeted once the buildings were hit, and balls of fire tore through the shafts after the impact. USA reported in 2002 that it had identified about 100 people who had escaped from elevators that they were pried open or whose doors were just opening as one of the planes hit. The paper said, however, that it could not ID any survivors who were rescued from stuck elevators. I met the monster in my closet. Everyone has heard of the boogeyman, a creature tall and dark who comes out at night and preys on fearful children. The story is a classic tale, one that every kid and their neighbor like to scare each other with during sleepovers. People have come up with different versions of the story, like how the boogeyman only comes out during the full moon, how it can transform himself into your greatest fears, or how it lives under your bed and waits for the right moment, right when you are most vulnerable, and snatches you. But I know the truth. There is no such thing as the boogeyman. No, there is only something far different. Something that strays from the legends. Something that you wouldn't expect. How do I know this, you might ask? It's because I saw the thing with my very eyes. I was 11 years old when it happened. I lived in a relatively quiet home in the suburbs with my mother and father. Being an only child, I had the privilege of getting everything I asked for. I had a large bedroom all to myself, filled with a vast assortment of toys and video games. I admit I was quite the spoiled kid. As the weeks went by and the storage space in my room slowly decreased, my parents decided it was time I got somewhere to store all my junk that wasn't on the floor. So, a few weeks prior to when it happened, they had found an old secondhand closet and decided it would fit nicely into my room. As the 11-year-old I was, I didn't have much of an option on the closet and let my parents place it and clean up how they wanted. Several days passed by without anything abnormal happening. I saw my friends from time to time and otherwise occupied myself playing games. Days turned into weeks, and soon enough, the closet was cluttered with my crap. Dust and cobwebs collected at the top, bite marks framed the door, and part of the corner had been chipped off due to my friends being a little too careless when roughhousing. If the second-hand closet looked old before, it aged quite rapidly after spending a few weeks in my bedroom. Thinking back, there was something about that closet that had always felt a little off. It was like I got this bad feeling, shivers, every time I got close to it. But as the kid I was, I took little to no notice of this and brushed it off as nothing. The night it happened, I had been playing with my favorite stuffies, making them play fight each other. My playtime was interrupted by my mother entering the room and telling me it was time for bed. I reluctantly put my stuffies away in the closet and crawled into bed. My mother tucked me in, peppered a few kisses on my cheek, and closed the lights as she left the room. I knew that I should have gone to sleep, but at that time, I just couldn't. I tried. I really did. But I had so much pent-up energy. I wanted to keep playing with my stuffies, not sleep. Surely 10 more minutes wouldn't hurt. I had thought to myself. I rolled over and watched the door for a few moments until I saw the light from around the border flick off. I sat up and instantly got to work opening my nightlight, then pattered towards the old closet. In the dim light, the closet felt like it was towering over my little body. I never really realized how tall it was until then. I felt bad shivering as I neared the piece of furniture, which I found odd, because I didn't feel cold at all. Dismissing this, I reached up and opened the door as silently as I could, as to not alert my parents, and looked in. Toys and cards and board games were scattered messily along the closet ground. Unable to really see, I reached in blindly, attempting to find my favorite stuffy, but to no avail. Frowning, I leaned my body forward when suddenly I felt something tumbling forward and right into the mess, the door behind me croaking loudly as I did so. I fumbled for a few moments to catch my footing, but found it was impossible to stand up with all the clutter around me. I scrambled forwards to try to find the walls of the closet so I could support myself, but I couldn't seem to find it no matter how far out I reached. Instead, I stumbled over myself once more and felt my body drop. A slight panic rose in my chest as I scurried backwards and finally felt myself push on the open closet door and tumble out. I sat there on the floor, breathing heavily while allowing myself to calm down. It took a moment, but as my eyes adjusted to my surroundings, I quickly realized that I wasn't in my room anymore. I knew this because I could see the faint outlines of the walls, and compared to my large, spacey room, this place was tiny. Not only that, but I could feel something soft and woven underneath where I sat, which was a contrast from the hard, cold floors of my own room. I stood and pattered forwards cautiously until I hit into something large and stiff. I wasn't sure what exactly I had bumped into, but before I had the chance to reach out and touch it, I heard a quiet click. A light had been turned on, causing me to hiss and squint my eyes in order to adjust from the darkness. I opened my eyes and was finally able to see my surroundings. I was in a bedroom of sorts. It was small and painted a light pink color and was adorned with several, a high-pitched sound coming from behind me interrupted my thoughts. I froze in an instant. There was something else here. I wasn't alone. I swallowed and turned around. Before me, at a little distance, stood the form of a being I had only heard about in night terrors. Its skin was pale and weathered with splotches of deep red stained underneath its wide, beady eyes. Its head was abnormally round and long, disheveled strands of hair matted its face. Two oval-shaped bulges stood out from either side of its face, partially hidden by its strands of hair, but still very much visible. Perhaps the most disturbing feature on its face being the wart placed right in the center that oozed clear liquid out of one of its holes. Its physique, on the other hand, stood quite short in stature. Its body was oddly symmetrical and proportionate, with bones barely visible through skin due to excess flesh and meat on the creature's body. Its slender limbs had curled in on themselves, and its paws protruded short, round claws in its tips. A fresh wave of fear consumed my being as I locked eyes with the monster, who stood as still as I was. I couldn't move an inch of my body, motor functions freezing as if they had lost all responses. But then, without warning, it started moving slowly towards me. It was quivering, twitching. It moved its limbs in a tentative way, one short appendage stretching itself in front of the other. It stopped quickly and suddenly. I could see the figure's thin torso breathing in and out at an irregular pace, breath coming in nothing more than a series of horrifying wheezing. My heart skipped a beat and I shook in my spot, my own breath labored by panic. I stared into the creature's dark eyes and swallowed. Thicker this time, forcing back a ball of anticipation that stuck with it. Any moment now, any sudden movement, and this thing could jump at me, and that would be it. I shifted my eyes around the room, but there was so little space and nowhere to run. The only exit was being blocked off by this monster. But then, something strange happened. The creature backed away and started to make noises, croaks and cracks and strange sounds came out of this thing's mouth, its facial expressions morphing as it mumbled, its eyes leaking some kind of clear liquid. Maybe it was trying to say something. Was it trying to threaten me? It had to be. There was no other fact. But its voice sounded minuscule. I was as frightened as I was. Surely it wasn't trying to talk to me. I stared at the creature. My thought process told me that maybe I could try to communicate with it, long enough to stall it and run until I could make it back to safety. And so I allowed a simple, cautious word to escape my lips and interject the creature's incoherent sounds. Hello? And then there was silence. The creature stiffened at my words, wide eyes become impossibly wider, and a pink mouth dropping down into what I recognized as an expression of shock. I thought for a moment that maybe it understood me, until an ear-piercing wail erupted from the monster. The creature threw its head back and shrieked a terrible sound that I had never heard in my life, being nothing short of purely animalistic. In my frozen state, I could see a light begin to illuminate from the small crack of the door, and a series of heavy banging sounds that came closer and closer to the room, getting louder as they did so. That's when I realized what was happening. It was calling its sisters. Realization dawned fast as the panic rose in my chest. The only thoughts going through my head at that moment was that if I didn't get out now, surely I was going to die. I was going to die without my family ever knowing where I went or what happened to me. The banging noises got closer, and I could begin to hear the sound of the other creatures getting closer. Their voices were deeper and less shrill than that of the thing in front of him, but caused shivers in my bones anyway. I had to get out, but how? I looked behind the creature, and sure enough, an exact replica of my closet stood up against pink walls. Adrenaline shot through me, and I suddenly regained control of my legs and made a dash for it, clumsily avoiding the creature as I bolted past it and straight to the familiarity of the wooden closed. I launched onto the handle and tore open the door with might I didn't know I contained. I hauled myself through the door and went to slam it shut before stopping myself last second, realizing quickly that the sound would only alert the monsters of my location. I curled up and stayed as still as possible, as quiet as possible. Through the thin crack of the door, I could only see the back of the monster and not its face. The banging noise coming from its sister ceased, but I could now clearly hear their voices, and I knew that they must have arrived, standing somewhere I could not see them. Muffled voices and thuds were all I heard for a couple of moments, before a new figure came into my field of vision, and I felt paralyzed as a new wave of fear that overtook me. The thing was massive. It appeared to look a fully fledged version of the wailing creature, a developed version. It crouched down to hold the smaller creature, and what seemed like hoarse, soothing sounds came out of its mouth, and it appeared to work, because the little creature slowly calmed down from its hysteria. Another even deeper voice came from behind the door where I could not see, and the little creature responded to it. Unintelligible sounds came out of its mouth, and to my horror, it stretched out its limbs to point right in my direction, right to where I was hiding. I could see the shadow of an even larger creature stepping towards my direction, and I flinched harshly, blind panic escaping me. I swallowed hard, willing the blur in my vision to disappear, but it refused. I shut my eyes and scooted backwards as far as I could, bracing myself for the worst. I kept crawling back and back, waiting for the moment the light would come in and expose my identity. Except it never came. Instead, I felt my back hitting into several little items. They clattered all around me as I pushed backwards in fearful determination to get away. Then, I felt myself hitting what must be the door of the closet and tumbled out, backflipping painfully through a clutter of toys until I finally rolled out of the dark closet. For a long moment, I simply laid there on my front, curled into a fetal position, unwilling to move. I hugged myself tightly with all of my limbs to try to stop my body from shaking, but it didn't do much. Then finally, I willed one of my eyes open. I was back in my room. I was back in my room. I couldn't believe it. Nothing had changed from since I left, save for the toys that were now scattered all around me. The closet doors were closed, and then I did the only thing I could think of in that moment. I screamed. I had no idea how long I was screaming for, but all I knew was that my voice was starting to break, and I could no longer keep back the cries of absolute anguish I had been holding in me. I was too out of it to notice the banging of my parents' footsteps making their way over to my room, or their voices calling out frantically. I didn't process the lights being turned on and only snapped out of my trance when my mother, so softly and soothingly, reached out her 3 arms to cradle me to her bony chest. "Sweetheart, what's wrong? Tell mommy what's wrong." "Closet," I rasped and reached out an arm to point directly at the closet. Both my mother and father shot their 8 bright red eyes to each other, then to the closet, then back to me. It was my mother who spoke first. "Oh, sweetie, what's wrong with the closet?" Monster," I mumbled, shoving my face deeper into the comfort of her bones. I heard my mother whisper something to my father, but I couldn't quite make out what they were saying. I felt a slender, clawed hand run circles up and down my back. "Daddy's gonna have a look in the closet, okay?" my mother whispered to me in her calm voice. I wanted to say no. I wanted to tell my father to stop before it was too late, but I couldn't. The words literally dying in my throat as if something in me physically wilted and died. I dared to peek 3 of my eyes open and watched as he opened the closet doors without a moment of hesitation and found nothing. There was nothing there except a messy pile of toys and a wooden wall behind it. My father smiled, exposing his sharp fangs in a reassuring way. "See there, kiddo? Nothing to be worried about." But it was there. There were 3 of them with 2 arms and legs, and it had so much hair and so much flesh. My mother shushed me and rocked me gently. "Shh. You're really tired, honey. There's nothing there, see? Now, why don't you go back to sleep? Oh, here. Why don't you take Mr. Fluffles with you?" Mr. Fluffles, my favorite stuffy, had been sprawled out on the ground right beside me. Its one eye and cute toothless smile bored straight at me. My father bent over and took Mr. Fluffles into his bristly arms and guided me out of my mother's arms to heft me up in his own. He shuffled over to my bedside and placed me onto my bed, tucking me and Mr. Fluffles in, and placed a kiss on my forehead. A wave of exhaustion overcame me, and I couldn't help but stifle a yawn. I heard my mother chuckle slightly as she stood beside my father at the edge of the bed. "Are you going to be okay to sleep now, sweetie?" Despite the shock I still felt all over my body, I nodded my head slowly. I was just too tired. I didn't want to play anymore. I just wanted to sleep. Sleep and pretend this never happened. The last thing I heard before I lost consciousness was my father's voice whispering, "Remember, kiddo, there's no such thing as the boogeyman." And that was something I was sure of. "Can I ask you two something?" I said to my mother and father, who looked at each other across the dinner table. "What is it, champ?" "It's about Michael." My father teared up a bit. He was always more sensitive than my mother. "Oh, honey," my mother said. "Is everything okay? Why'd he do it?" "I was the one who found my older brother. It happened 1 week ago today. All I remember was going into the bathroom and seeing blood. So much blood. He seemed happy whenever I hung out with him." My mother walked over and hugged me. "Oh, sweetie, sometimes the people who seem the happiest are the saddest on the inside." "His girlfriend just broke up with him too," my father said, wiping his tears. "A broken heart can drive a man crazy." I refused to believe it. I got up from the dinner table and went to bed, so I didn't have to think about Michael. I woke up in the middle of the night when I felt something wet on my feet. I grabbed my phone, looked under the blanket, and turned on the flashlight. There was blood. So much blood. "Brother," a voice faintly spoke. I slowly lowered the covers, hands trembling, and my brother was at the end of my bed. His skin was chalky and the color had left his cheeks, but it was him. His wrists were still bleeding. "I was murdered," he wheezed. "Murdered?" I could barely speak. I was terrified. "Avenge me." He slowly disappeared, fading away like smoke. I immediately took my bloody sheets to the washer. Of course, he was murdered. It made so much sense. While my sheets were washing, I took a shower and tried to figure out who could have done this. Then it hit me. His girlfriend just broke up with him. I vowed to gut that bitch just like she did my brother. Make it look like a suicide and get away scot-free. 3 days later, I did exactly that. I made it home safely and was feeling euphoric. I had avenged my brother. I was walking to my room when my parents called for me from the living room. "Hey," I said nervously. What's up?" Surely they didn't know what I just did. How could they? "There's something we need to tell you about your brother," my father said. I swallowed hard. What?" "Well," my mother said, "we decided we should tell you why he killed himself." "Son, your brother, saw things. Saw people that weren't there. Apparently it runs in the family. The older he got, the worse it got for him. And eventually he couldn't take it anymore." "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because one day you might start seeing things too, son. Seeing people that aren't there, telling you horrible things, lying to you. If that ever happens, you need to tell us immediately, okay? I stared blankly. Honey, you haven't seen anything like that, have you? My husband was murdered at work. He managed a gas station when he was robbed. He cooperated, gave them all the money, and that monster still shot him. The only thing that kept me together was trying to care for our son, David. His father's murder was all over the news. David took it very hard. He was barely talking to anyone. He wouldn't eat. Mostly, he was sleeping. I'd go to his room at 3 in the afternoon and he'd still be asleep. Before long, I got him to a psychiatrist to get him on some antidepressants. I prayed that once they were working, I'd have my smiling boy back. But he started sleeping more, longer, up to eat breakfast, then right back to sleep. He'd fight me when I tried to wake him up. David, you can't sleep all day. If you want to feel better, you have to get up and get some exercise. You don't understand. I need to sleep. David, please. Dad's there. Honey, we all have dreams. No, he's there. They aren't dreams. I can feel him. I remember everything. He wants me to be with him. We'll talk to Dr. Rossum and get your dosage adjusted. Now, get up. I forced him to go on a walk with me. He didn't speak the entire time. That night, I warned him I was setting an alarm for the next morning and wouldn't let him sleep in. He begrudgingly wished me good night. The next morning, he didn't wake up. I shook and shouted, but he was limp and pale. That's when I saw the empty bottle of antidepressants and a note. I want to live with Dad, so I've decided to sleep forever. I'm sorry, Mom. I kept thinking he would wake up, even after the ambulance and police came. I kept waiting for the morgue to call to say he woke up. I laid in his bed and cried all night. The sun rose. I was so exhausted. I passed out. It was like I was in a Ghibli movie. Everything was so warm and inviting. I saw my husband and son playing catch with a football. When they saw me, they cheered and ran to me, hugging me and showering me with kisses. Are you staying, Mom? Something was wrong. My son I recognized, but the more I looked at my husband, the less familiar he looked. Something glowing behind his eyes. His smile was too yellow. I felt the hot breath when he whispered in my ear, "Your son is mine now." I awoke in a cold sweat. The sun was now setting. I ran to my room. I searched the boxes in my closet to find my husband's old .32 revolver and ran back to my son's bed. Whatever that thing was, it had my son. I needed to save him. It's time to go to sleep for the last time. All throughout the 1980s, I preyed upon the residents of Oak Street as they slept in their beds. I took great joy in taunting them inside their dreams before finally killing them with a glove in which I had wielded 4 sharp blades to the fingers. But that was the old me. The dream demon was dead. I am now a new man with a new look. Plastic surgery has come a long way since the 80s. You can hardly notice my burns now. The wonders of modern medicine are truly miraculous. My new look on life is all thanks to the good folks here at the therapy group. I would still be killing if it wasn't for Keith. To him, I am eternally grateful. He taught me that there was much more to life than murdering people in their dreams. Life was a beautiful thing to be cherished. Since signing up for the rehabilitation program, I have not once felt the urge to kill, and I was no longer effing and geffing either. Only now do I realize how vulgar my language was at a younger age. There are others here too, who, like me, took a wrong path in life, and are familiar to fix their ways. One particular fellow, and I go way back. He cut my head off with a machete once, but after getting to know him, I realized now that he is actually a big softy, despite his size. He doesn't say much, but I probably wouldn't be able to hear him through that hockey mask anyway. This place is filled with all kinds of interesting characters, from inbred cannibals to chainsaw maniacs, and even a guy with a hook for a hand who lives inside a mirror. All have a place here. I also heard talk of a new arrival earlier. Apparently it's a killer doll who tried to steal a young boy's body. But anyway, the whole point of this is to let any fellow slashers out there know that killing is not the answer, and there is always a place for you here with us, amongst like-minded people who, together, will break the vicious cycle of murder and mayhem. The Slashers Therapy Group is always open to all the tortured souls in need of some guidance. It is the chance of a lifetime to make right the wrongs that have been done. It helped me, and it can you as well. For the first time in my life, I feel pure, free of all the torments and the rage that I had previously felt. My new calling in life is to give people happy dreams, in which they are safe from any harm. The people of Oak Street are unaware that the demon who once stalked them in their dreams was now one they called the Dream Angel. Once again, special thanks to Keith for believing in me when nobody else did. I met Sabrina on a dating site for morbidly obese women. She was smart, sweet, and best of all, she weighed over 400 pounds. Just how I like them. A fat pig is a happy pig. We had been talking for months before eventually she agreed to meet with me and come and stay at my farm. I had butterflies in my stomach on the drive to her house. And as I came into her driveway, I saw her waiting for me on a mobility scooter. My eyes lit up. She was perfect. I got out of the car and greeted her with a kiss on the cheek. "You are much better looking in person," I said, winking. "Thank you," Sabrina replied, blushing. I waited until she was in the car before plunging the syringe in her thick neck, then drove back to the farm with my new pig. Her new home had already been prepared. The old pig pen needed some use. Ever since my previous pig, Bethany, had died, the place felt dull. But Sabrina was going to change that. She was going to thrive in her new enclosure. She wasn't easy to get into the pig pen either. I nearly threw my back out trying to drag her in. But eventually I prevailed. After all, this wasn't my first rodeo. I had been keeping pigs all of my adult life. When Sabrina opened her eyes, she looked at me. Then her eyes darted the room and landed on the skeletal remains of Bethany that were partially sunk into the wet, sloshy mud. She then started to scream. It was a tragic thing what happened to Bethany. She just refused to eat, I said as a grin formed on my lips. She continued to scream. It wasn't a problem. The farm was in the middle of nowhere and she wouldn't be able to make such a racket for much longer. Not after I cut out her tongue and sew her mouth shut. She passed out as soon as the scissors bit into her tongue, making sewing her mouth much easier. And once that was done, only one task remained: inserting the feeding tube. She opened her eyes as I cut into her fat belly and inserted the tube. She shivered and let out a whimpering sound through her nostrils. With the feeding tube now inserted, she could finally have dinner. And as I scurried every bend for 5 miles, gathering the finest slop for my pig, I blended it all up into a pink slimy mixture. And when I started pumping the slop into her stomach, her body creased in on itself in agony. She tried to pull the tube from her stomach, but soon stopped upon my warning. You don't want to do that. Bethany tried to pull her tube out, and look what happened to her. She has nothing but bones in the mud, I said, stroking Sabrina's head. Now, eat your slop like a good little pig. I have a deranged mind. I know this. How could I not? While other kids climbed trees or rode their bike, I was using the hunting knife my dad brought me to see what the inside of a cat looked like. The answer? Wet, squishy, and warm. And yes, I did have a little taste. It wasn't very nice. Quite metallic, actually, like sucking on an old coin. One cat started squirming around, still alive, as I was feeling about inside its stomach. The anguished noises it made were soothing, and that look in its eyes, the look of betrayal, that is what really got me excited. The final stare before life leaves the eyes completely is priceless. But there are only so many cats and dogs you can kill before growing bored. So, by age, I believe 13, or was it 14? I don't know, don't care. Anyway, doesn't matter. I started eyeing up a homeless man sleeping in an alleyway. Best thing about homeless people is they won't be missed. Easy prey. I waited until nightfall as he laid sleeping on his cardboard boxes in an alleyway that stunk of piss. I hovered over him as I fidgeted with the hunting knife in my hand. He was passed out drunk, and I could smell the whiskey on his heavy breath. I plunged the knife into his abdomen and sliced upwards, opening his stomach. I reached my hand inside and felt around the lovely warmth and wiggled my fingers around his guts. He tried to scream, but all that came out was a pathetic whimper. I slit his throat and put my face right up to his, in order to better see the light leave his eyes. And in that moment, looking into his eyes, I saw my destiny. A shoekeeper found the old tramp's body the next day. Apparently, he went pale as a ghost upon finding it, according to the local newspaper. The police didn't suspect a thing either. They said it was a drug deal gone wrong, and the rush I felt upon getting away with it was pure bliss. I laid low for years after that. Every night as I laid in bed, I would savor the memory of the last moment in his eyes, That moment where life became fragile and weak, until eventually succumbing to the embrace of nothingness. The bloodlust has always been with me. I don't think it will ever leave. I'm in my early 30s now. Got a lovely wife and 2 beautiful children. My life couldn't be any happier, really. Only I get these lingering thoughts in my mind that will not go away. Thoughts no father or husband should have of his own family. I wonder what their insides would feel like, and what would their eyes show me. Welcome back. I take it you found this place useful? I'm glad you did. With some more time, we should be able to make this place possibly inhabitable for a majority of the population. Right. I did tell you I'd explain the denizens yesterday, didn't I? All right, sit down and get ready. The denizens. The denizens are presumably native to the breezeway and possibly other realities. We aren't sure. They're like us, humans. They're pretty much the same physically, but not in terms of appearance. They are commonly black entities. No, the color, not the race. Their eyes are a glowing white. They do seem to have hair and facial hair, and are usually dressed in old fabrics sewn into clothing. They're pretty friendly for the most part, unless you anger one or something. Then they'll probably get angry at you. But some go out of the way to actively harm, and in some cases, kill humans. Here are the do's. Search for a green pin located on their body. If you can see it, run. They're not friendly. We've given green pins to denizens that we can trust, and if we can trust them, you can too. For the next ones, these only apply to denizens who have a green pin. Don't follow these if they don't. Accept resources. Denizens don't seem to need food, or at least the same amount we do. They can seem to go ages, and therefore it seems they'll offer something up. Accept it. Even if you don't need it, it might come in handy. Talk to them. They're friendly enough and might give some information. If you learn anything, report it to us. It might be new information we didn't have previously. And now, here are the don'ts. Interact with any denizen not wearing a green pin. These ones aren't friendly and are possibly lethal. Do not offer a pen to any saying they've lost theirs. They are lying to you and are attempting to seem trustworthy to others by obtaining one. I think that's it. I think that's all I have for you. Go now. Safe travels. Tuesday night, Darcy and I were scouting Halloween events in the country to take our girlfriends to on the weekend. There are several haunted houses in town, but everyone goes to those, and we wanted to take them somewhere different, interesting, something they'd remember forever. I think we achieved that goal, just not the way I expected. I was driving because I own and maintain the car. Before we left, I went through the usual steps, like telling Darcy to put on his damn seatbelt and recording our starting mileage. It was 36,177, which Darcy said was a good sign. He also informed me he's never gone past town limits before. Darcy's my roommate, and talk like that is why I remind him about the seatbelt whenever he's in the car with me. Darcy was checking, I don't know what, as soon as we got on the road. He kept shouting out the names of promising events, and every single time I had to tell him to enter it on the GPS. Most of the locations were way too far. He found a haunted hayride in Ottawa, Canada. My car is in good shape, but gas does not grow on trees. Oh, in Canada, my car doesn't have snow tires. Look, I researched before we left. There are like a dozen farms within an hour's drive from the town limits. Finding some kind of scary Halloween event should have been a simple 2, maybe 3-hour road trip drive at most. Around 4:30 p.m., I was ready to call it quits. We'd been on the road since 2, and the only thing close to a scary event was Duncan Drive, where you had to jump off a diving board and pick up an apple from the bottom of some guy's pool with your teeth. Did I mention the event was for women only? We were on Kirkston Side Road when we passed a sign that said we were on Side Road 211. Darcy was the one who noticed it and asked me where we'd make the turn. Thing was, we hadn't made a turn and GPS said we were still on Kirkston. Maybe someone switched signs around for an extra bit of a scare, he offered. I noticed and gently pushed the gas pedal a little further down. Something felt off about the road sign not matching GPS. I'd never heard of a side road 211, and we hadn't made a turn off Kirkston since leaving the Duncan Dive place. Not more than a minute later, Darcy told me to pull over at an upcoming sign. It was a huge wooden roadside sign. Most of it looked hand-painted, despite churning up a cloud of dust. I managed to pull over and stop the car as requested. The sign promised a scary cornfield maze, a mere 3 miles down the first road on our right. Further, it listed a concession stand for drinks, snacks, and light meals, and free parking. Plus, the maze could be completed in 20 to 30 minutes, so it was, as the sign said, ideal for young children and people in a hurry. It's worth a look, Darcy said. I glanced at the dashboard. It's already 5. The sun sets in an hour. Are you sure? Darcy was sure. We'll be there in 3 minutes. We don't have to go through the maze. Maybe we can reserve a spot for Friday night if it looks good. Come on, let's go. Bruh, cornfields feature big in horror movies, so I repeat, are you sure? He rolled his window up part way and held up his phone. It was displaying the current time as 4 after 5. 3 minutes. If we aren't there in 3 minutes, we turn around and go home. Deal? I threw the car into gear and got back on the road. Darcy chuckled, put his phone on the seat divider, and rolled down his window again. We turned right at the first crossroad, and sure enough, I could see a turn here for the maze sign. In a short distance road, the road with an arrow pointing to the left. I drove. Darcy picked up his phone. It should have been the easiest drive of the day, but my gut was telling me something was way out of place. I wanted to go at top speed, but didn't want to punch the gas. The sign to turn was so close. But we didn't get any closer to the sign. We were doing 40 miles per hour and weren't going anywhere. I took the risk and punched the gas. We went to 50, 60, 75 miles an hour and still managed to not get any closer to our destination. The sun had dropped. It was already dusk. We had been driving forever and hadn't moved an inch. What time is it? I screamed as I hit the brakes. The car, which I swear hadn't moved at all, kicked up another cloud of dust and sat, purring in the middle of the road. Calm down, bro. It's 5:06. What is your issue? He waved his phone in front of me. It was showing the current time as 506. Sweat was running down the left side of my forehead. I wiped at it with my left hand and blinked twice before looking out the windshield. We were parked under overhead lights in an otherwise empty parking lot. Except for the lights, it was already dark. We were facing a swath of corn stalks with a flashing "Enter Here" sign at the side of a pathway separating the stalks into two sections. Darcy was already out of his seatbelt and about to open the door. I realized I was holding my breath, so I exhaled as calmly as possible. How the hell did we get here? He turned to stare at me as his door opened. Look, I get it, Paz. You don't want to check this out. Stay put. I'll do it myself. Movement on the other side of the door caught my attention. The door opened fully, and as Darcy climbed out, the hottest girl I'd ever seen held the door open for me. She wasted no time taking his arm and leading him to the pathway and into the cornfield. By the time I got out of the car, I couldn't see either of them. I started jogging along the pathway. They couldn't be that far ahead of me. But with the corn stalks on both sides, it was hard to see too far, and I don't know why, I got the unsettling feeling the stalks were getting closer to me as I continued. A sharp pain on the top of my head made me see stars. Before my vision cleared, several knives jabbed into my shoulders, arms, and back. The sound of bullets hitting the ground around me drowned out my screams. Who the hell was trying to kill me, and why? None of this made sense until I saw hail the size of golf balls falling all around me. Not knives, not bullets. A hailstorm had appeared out of nowhere. I unlocked the car with my fob, then held my hands over my head for whatever cover they could provide while I ran back to the car for protection. I figured Darcy would make his way back to the car as well. No such luck. Whatever hot girl took him, I hoped it was keeping them out of danger. Before I could begin to plan my next move, the hail stopped and was replaced by the sound of a million cicadas. My heart rate had increased, and it was loud enough to compete with the cicadas for most annoying noise of the night. There was no way I would hear Darcy over all of that, so no point yelling for him to answer. Figuring he was somewhere within the maze, I texted him to do something so I could find him, whatever it was. I told him to make sure it's obvious and to wait until I showed up. A short text came back. The light. Light? What light? I sat in the car because I don't know what to do next. The cicadas were getting louder. My windows were closed, and the bug symphony was starting to hurt my ears. I could feel my muscles tensing as if my body was ready for flight or fight. Not a good sign. And I didn't see any. Then I saw it. An obscenely bright light from within the maze. I closed my eyes and could still see the light, and the bugs got louder. I stuck my phone into my jacket pocket and slammed my hands over my ears. Eyes closed, ears covered, missing one passenger. The day showed signs of not ending well. Can't lie, I almost shit myself when someone knocked loudly on my side window. Although my heart was still pounding, I couldn't hear the cicadas anymore, even with my hands off my ears, and I don't see the light. So I slowly opened my eyes, first the left, then the right. The second hottest girl I'd ever seen opened my car door. She smiled, put her hand on my arm and said, "Hi, I'm Poppy. You should go home." Poppy wasn't wrong, but I wasn't about to leave without Darcy. I put my left foot on the ground to show I was getting out of the car. She moved slightly, but didn't let go of my arm. As I stood, I was able to look directly into her eyes. They reminded me of goat eyes. I've never raised goats, but I've seen enough horror movies to know goat eyes when I see them. The bright light shone into the sky from the same spot as before. It was off before I could shield my eyes with my hands. Poppy's hand on my arm was starting to bother me, like I was allergic to her or something. It was disturbing. Since I was wearing a jacket and no matter what was on her hand, it shouldn't be affecting my skin. "You should go home," she repeated, still smiling. "Okay, Poppy, I'll leave as soon as I get Darcy." "No, go home. Celine will make sure he calls." A scream jarred me so badly I shook. It was a deeper toned voice, not high-pitched. It sounded like Darcy. Poppy's hand was uncomfortably warm, approaching hot. There was no way her hand should have felt that hot. The bright light appeared again and disappeared almost immediately. Another scream. That time, I was sure it came from the same area as the light. Poppy pushed me down heavily on my arm, which caused me to lean forward slightly. She brought her beautiful face with goat eyes so close to my face, I could have kissed her on the cheek without moving. "Go home," she whispered into my ear. Problem was, I felt no air, no breath from her. She whispered without speaking out loud. I pushed her hand off my arm and ran towards the pathway to get to the light. The pattern of bright light followed by a scream continued. By the fifth scream, I forced my way through corn stalks for a few feet instead of sticking to the pathway. That was a mistake. The hottest girl, who I guess was Celine, was standing to my left, hands held in a prayer position, her face glowing like she was an angel. She looked happier than a kid getting a new car for Christmas, but far more calm. I think maybe it was an expression of joy. Her gaze was locked on the events ahead of her. As much as she looked like she was watching the greatest thing on earth, I had to fight a sense of dread to turn my head in the same direction. A green human face stared at me from roughly 3 feet above the ground. The face extended from and was supported by a few corn stalks. There was no body, no legs, no arms. It was just a face. A face that was consuming Darcy. Darcy's head, right hand, and part of his torso were sticking out of the green face's mouth. As much as I wanted to pull Darcy down, I froze in place and tried to figure out how his arm was bent so only his hand was visible. I don't think Darcy knew I was there. He never turned to look at me. The way he extended from his green face was almost comical, until the bright light shone again for a half a second. The green mouth widened slightly and drew Darcy in up to his neck so only his head was visible. Darcy gave one last desperate scream. I wanted to pull Darcy out of May's face. I wanted to see he was all right and laugh with him all the way to the car. I wanted to get out of there and never speak of this again. Instead, my body staunchly refused to move, even when May's face stared at me and smiled. I'm glad May's face didn't speak. I don't know how I would have reacted. His smile alone forced me to sit on my haunches, shaking, hugging myself and gasping. Once I was seated, the bright light blipped one last time and Darcy disappeared. I wanted nothing more than to get the hell out of there, but I sat, rocking back and forth, crying like I was the upcoming victim in a dumbass horror movie. Out of nowhere, Poppy grabbed my arm again and pulled me to my feet. I was sure she was going to push me into maze space. Instead, she pushed me through the stalks towards the path to get out of the cornfield. She spoke one last time. One sacrifice per moon. One. Go home. No one will believe you. My arm hurt really badly. So badly, I stopped staring at her and glanced at her hand on my arm. My jacket sleeve wasn't engulfed in flames, but smoke was coming from my arm. I'm not proud to admit what I did next, but it's the truth and I gotta get it out. Instead of fighting Poppy, instead of fighting Mazeface, instead of taking pictures or doing anything heroic, I shook her hand off my arm and ran. When I was almost at the car, I tripped over some corn stalks that I hadn't managed to kick away while running. Without thinking, because thinking was almost impossible for me at that point, I took another step and ended up on the hood of the car, entangled in the stalks. I don't remember any more after that night. Not the drive home, not getting into the house, not getting into bed. Wednesday morning, Darcy wasn't in the house. I told myself he'd got an early ride to work or gone to his girlfriend after we got home. But when I got out of the shower and saw Poppy's handprints on my arm, I knew. I knew it before I saw corn stalks stuck in the wipers and before I checked the car's mileage. 600 miles, more than when we started the drive Tuesday afternoon. Still, I didn't want to acknowledge it. I went into work alone, and when Darcy wasn't there, I assured myself he's gone to his girlfriend's. His girlfriend texted me as soon as I got home Wednesday. Darcy hadn't contacted her all day. Was he okay? I said we're on different shifts this week. Thursday morning, I hadn't seen or heard from Darcy. Couldn't even finish my coffee, so I downed half a bottle of Pepto to calm down my stomach. It didn't work. Mid-afternoon, my shift leader called me over. "You look like hell," he said quietly. "Ugh, I'm fine, thanks." "No, you aren't. You're shaking, sweating. If I didn't know better, I'd say your skin is gray. You don't smell of alcohol, and I don't see signs of other intoxicants. You're not well. Get out of here, dude. See a doctor if you don't feel better tomorrow. Just text me to let me know." He wasn't wrong. I recoiled every time Darcy's girlfriend texted, even though I'd stopped replying on Wednesday. I couldn't eat, chat, or focus on my work. A police car pulled into the parking lot as I was leaving, a very common occurrence. When they're taking a break, they'd often come to the coffee shop in our building. For the first time ever, I scrunched down as low as possible, hoping the cop couldn't see me behind the steering wheel. So, here I am, sitting in the corner of my bedroom, rocking back and forth and questioning all of my life decisions. Darcy's gone. He's never coming back, and it won't take long for police to suspect me. Mazeface is waiting placidly until next month for his next meal, and I'm the obvious choice. I don't know what to do about any of this, so after this uploads, I'm going back to bed. My house was built in the 90s, and my family has lived in it upon its completion. Absolutely no reason for my house to be haunted or demonic, yet unnatural things always happen in my home. I heard footsteps in the attic and had felt uneasiness, but mostly things that I could reasonably explain as, oh, squirrels in the attic, or maybe I'm just scared for no reason, and such, until just a few years ago. Every Christmas, my family would come over and stay the holiday in my house. I was around 16, and my room was taken over by my uncle, meaning I had to pack my stuff and move to the couch in my living room next to the Christmas tree. One night, I was trying to go to sleep earlier than usual, at around 9 p.m. I just wanted the night to be over with. I was lying there listening to the Christmas tunes my tree played, when suddenly I could hear small, silent whispers. I tried listening closely since it sounded like it could be coming from the tree. Wanted to confirm it was. I was bored and couldn't sleep. But the whispers only got louder. It was unintelligible. The whispers were clear, yet I couldn't hear anything they were saying. I got up and stared at the tree and asked, "Who's whispering?" Everything went dead silent except for the sound of "Oh Little Town of Bethlehem" playing from the tree. Staring at the tree, I took it as I was losing my mind and laid back down, pretending nothing happened. That's when all hell broke loose. A loud and clear whisper, as if right next to my ear, said, "He can hear us." And a barrage of voices overwhelmed me. I'm tearing up remembering it. I could hear the whispers this time. "Help us. Help. Help us. Save us." I was terrified. I didn't know what to do. I wanted to run, but I was scared to acknowledge that I could hear them. Finally, I got up and ran like hell to the room where my parents were watching a movie. I don't really know how to end my experience. I slept in their room, and since then, I've yet to hear those voices again. It's weird when I recount or remember this experience. I begin to tear up for no reason. I grew up in a small town in the Pacific Northwest, population around 3,000. I was around 10 years old at the time. Late one night, we were getting home from the city, and my mother needed to stop by the grocery store. Back then, it wasn't unusual for kids to be left in the car while their parents ran in. I was sitting in the back seat while the car was running, listening to the radio. The parking lot is almost deserted, and it's very dark. That's when I heard and felt my door try to move, but it was locked. I loomed at the window, and there was a tall, blonde man staring back at me. I was terrified. I saw him look at the driver's door, and quickly I reached over to lock it. Manual locks. It was an old car. Then I locked the other doors. Through the glass, he smiled the creepiest smile I had ever seen. Almost a snarl. He said he knew my mother and that she agreed to give him a ride home and to let him in. In all honesty, that sounded like something my mother would say. However, I yelled through the glass that I'd wait for my mom before I unlocked the door. Then he said, "Okay, but can you at least roll down the windows so I can put my bags in?" I saw no bags. And even at 10 years old, I wasn't stupid. I shook my head and said, "Sorry, wait for Mom." His smile turned into absolute anger. Luckily, an employee was out gathering shopping carts since it was such a small town. He knew my car and ran over yelling. The guy ran away really fast into the woods that were between the store and the highway. I started crying, and the employee asked if I wanted to come into the store. I was too scared, so I said I just wanted to wait for my mom. He stayed next to the car until she came out and told her what had happened. They called the police and they asked me a bunch of questions, but I had never seen the man before. I'm so grateful for the employee of the store. He probably saved my life. Guy with the creepy smile. Let's not meet ever again. And that, dear listeners, brings a close to these subscriber-requested Halloween horror stories. If you are sleeping, I hope Slumberland is treating you comfortably. If you're awake, I hope you've enjoyed this collection. Until next time, keep yourself safe, and I look forward to reading to you soon. Have yourself a good morning, a good afternoon, or good evening. Peace, love, and light to you all.